So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce our legislators and the legislative assistants. And if I miss somebody because I didn't catch them when they came in, please forgive me, and we'll just kind of go. And I really appreciate everybody taking the time to come. It's a beautiful sunny day. I know the legislators and the legislative assistants are exhausted from this session, so really appreciate it. So the people, excuse me, of the people I see on my screen, I see Dave Paul, who's the state representative from the 10th. I see Alex Rammel, state representative for the 40th, and Amanda Hubik, who's his ledge assistant. Excuse me, I'm really sorry. I see Kaylee Galloway, who's the ledge assistant for Deborah, and Liz Lovelet just came in. Did I miss anybody?
Hi, I'm Maisie, and I'm Rep. Paul's legislative assistant in the 10th.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So great. Thank you all again. And the way we'll kind of do it is to have each of the legislators or their assistants talk and explain what went on for about 10 minutes. And then we'll open it up to questions. So I'm going to also mention before we start, I'm going to tell which committees these folks are on. Our legislators are enormously busy. I don't know how they have time to do what they do, but they're on a ton of different committees. It's really great. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to start in a little different way. I'm going to start with the 10th. And that's because we usually don't. And I really wanted Paul to have a chance to kind of talk a little bit about what's going on and kind of focus a little bit on the 10th, because we do have folks from the 10th, and it's a really important area, and we'd like to win another seat or two at some point. So Dave is the vice chair of the Community and Economic Development Committee. He's on the Transportation Committee and the College and Workforce Development Committee. And Maisie Shaver, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, is his legislative assistant. So I'm going to turn it over to those two and let them tell us what's going on in the 10th, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Barbara. Can folks hear me okay? So we're outside, and because I just unmuted, my dog decided to start barking, and that was Beth chasing after my dog. I'm very sorry about that. So hi folks, I'm Dave Paul. It's so nice to see so many folks. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be engaged, and so many of you, if not all of you, wrote to me during the session, and I really appreciate that. It is so nice to see everybody, and for a couple of folks I hadn't met before, it's nice to see faces to names. So I'm Dave Paul. My family and I live in Oak Harbor, and this is my second legislative session. Represent the 10th district, which is all of Island County and parts of Skagit, and Snohomish County and parts of Fidalgo Island. I have been blessed this year. Maisie Schaefer is my legislative assistant. She has done a remarkable job helping us and responding to emails and working on some of our policy. Okay. Folks still hear me?
Yeah.
And there's Beth again. You know, we really focused this year on COVID relief and trying to help families and small businesses with the pandemic. So we did a lot of really good work first with the federal dollars and put, I think, really important investments into childcare, into small business recovery, and into families and folks that were most impacted by the pandemic and the recession. Really pleased at the end of the session, we fully funded the Working Families Tax Credit. That's the first time we've ever funded that. That is a really important piece of legislation to help our neediest members of our community and to finally fix our regressive tax structure. I think infrastructure is really important to our district, and broadband, we knew before the pandemic was critically important. Once, um, once the pandemic struck, we knew it's not only important for economic vitality, but for also education and healthcare. So asked to be on the Community and Economic Development Committee to work on broadband, really pleased with the funding out of the capital budget, but also some important policy bills that will allow our local governments and ports and PUDs to offer internet like the city of Anacortes is doing right now. I think that's just critically important to providing access to broadband in rural communities like ours. Focused, going into the session, really concerned about learning loss for children. And the more we talk to providers and to school officials, into parents and students, really became concerned. We already knew that mental health was an issue with our young people, but increasingly concerned that the pandemic put extra stresses on our young folks. So really worked hard in this session to look at ways of supporting mental health for young people and across our community, across all ages in our community, but really focused on young people. And we have a very interesting pilot project in Island County that we're hoping to replicate in the state. Also happy to see more counselors at the K-12 level and a lot more resources to help with rural mental health care across our region. And then finally, climate change and addressing, protecting our quality of life and our environment is critically important in our district. Really excited to see the clean fuel standard get passed. We know that transportation accounts for 45% of our greenhouse gases in our state. So really pleased to see that finally get across the finish line. We've had 2 really good sessions on helping to protect our environment and being national leaders on addressing climate change. So those are kind of 4 areas I think are really important. And I'd rather, not talk very much and get your questions later. Would like to give Maisie a chance because many of you have worked with Maisie, and maybe her impressions as a legislative assistant of what that was like. I know this is a different session. We did all remotely. I did all of our committee work, all of our constituent work from, Maisie was in Bellingham, I was in Oak Harbor, but would like Maisie to have the opportunity to also introduce herself and say what she learned this session.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Maisie and I'm Rep. Paul's legislative assistant. This was actually my first legislative session, so it was interesting to kind of get used to everything in a remote context, but I think it went better than we had both expected. And I've really, really loved working for Rep. Paul in the 10th and kind of getting the perspectives from a swing district and getting to engage with both sides of the aisle a little bit and just learn what is important to people. I think it was we passed a lot of really meaningful legislation as a whole this session. And I'm really proud to have worked with this team and as a part of this, and have loved the projects that we've been working on.
Oh, good. Well, I want to thank you and all the other assistants. You guys were great to get all this organized, and really appreciate your help and all the back and forths. I know that you're really busy, so I really appreciate you taking the time. Now, I just got I can't find Liz on my screen, but Liz just came in and she said, I know that she has been on Eastern Washington and is probably pretty tired. So Liz, if you're here still.
I'm here.
Okay, let's jump around out of order so that, because I know you can't stay. And I know you've been coming from another area, Eastern Washington. So Liz is the vice chair of the Environmental Energy and Technology Committee. She's on the Housing and Local Government Committee and the Transportation Committee. And her assistant is Jordan Cronin. And I don't know if he's here today. I didn't see him.
He's not here tonight.
Okay. So Liz, if you could give us a little update before you head home, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. The timing worked out just right. I'm kind of at that in-between point. Senator Saldana and I just went to Yakima to sign a number of worker protection bills and my farm worker housing bill. So that's why we were out there. That was an incredible suite of legislation in terms of worker protection. There's the Health Emergency Safety Act, which has to do with ensuring that people have adequate access to personal protective equipment and labor standards that go into place in a state of emergency like we've been experiencing with the pandemic. One was specifically to deal with the health and safety of nurses. One had to do with fortifying our whistleblower protections. So, in some of those local examples that I think we're familiar with around people who came forward with information about the workplace protection violations that they were seeing to ensure that they are not subject to retaliation. And then I have a tax exemption reformation bill that has to do with ensuring that we are getting quality community-based farm worker housing. So a lot of farm worker housing that gets built, they want to do out on the farm itself. And, the contention was put out there that, folks want to live in the community. They don't want to live where they work. And there's also a lot of heartburn around the way that we integrate the H-2A workforce that comes to the state on a visa during the harvest season versus our domestic force that's here year round and is just a vibrant part of our communities. So ensuring that they have expanded opportunities for the creation of housing in their areas. And then the big one that we were out celebrating today is that we are the second state in the nation to have overtime pay for agricultural workers. And this is a huge deal. For those of you that aren't as familiar with this issue, farm workers have long been exempt from labor standards in a number of scenarios, but the most egregious of which is, they can work anywhere 50, 60, 70, 80 hours during the peak of the harvest season and only get compensated for that base 40 hours. So the fact that we're phasing that in gave the growers time to be able to comply and modify their business plans so that they can ensure that they're giving people a fair and dignified wage for all of the hours that they're working. So this was I was really proud to be out there today signing those bills with Governor Inslee and my colleagues that work in the labor and commerce space. Some other highlights from this session. One thing I will just say is that the level of participation that we were able to have from communities across the state in our virtual hearings and to be able to get that testimony from people was so compelling. I mean, I personally remember as a council member in Anacortes driving down to Olympia to do my 1-minute statement in a hearing in the Energy Environment Committee so many years ago and just thinking, this was a whole day that people spend in order to participate in democracy. And I think that I'm really hopeful that the platform that we've set up for people to be able to testify virtually is a really compelling way to get more and more people involved in the process of the creation of policy and how we develop stronger and more inclusive policies over time. I would also highlight some of the kind of operating budget requests that came through this year via our district. We were able to get the Quiet Sound Initiative, which helps work with the maritime industry to reduce engine noise for our local whale population and other other of our mega residents in our area that are so near and dear to our hearts. We also were able to get through a proviso for both Guimas Island and the San Juans that has to do with doing a baseline study for water availability. We get these growth allocations from Department of Commerce, and especially on an island where they don't really know what the aquifer recharge rate is or what the saltwater intrusion rate is, it's really difficult to properly forecast what kind of growth they can really are really able to take on. So I'm very excited to see those studies be fully funded and able to get out the door. Personally did a lot of work for the Guimas Ferry project. So we got an onshore terminal infrastructure capital request funded. We were able to get a bill through that helps with their request for proposals. We were able to get the boat itself funded in the Forward Washington package. So there was a lot of steps along the way to really get that put into place. And then speaking of ferries, I'm so thrilled this year to have really formalized the Ferry Legislator Caucus with Representative Paul working over in the House. We set up a kind of, we started a little more loosely last year, but this year really put together our delegation. It's bipartisan, it's bicameral. We really wanted to make sure that as we look at the needs that are inherent in our particular area around the state ferries, that we have multiple legislators in both chambers keeping their eye on particularly the capitalization of vessels over time. For any of you that have ridden out to the San Juans anytime in the last bunch of years, you know that the boats are aged. A lot of the infrastructure needs a lot of upgrades, and we have a lot of boats to build over time. So that has been a really great experience, and we're going to continue working over the course of these coming months as we put together the bigger transportation package that we need to come back for over the interim, that we have our intent language to fully fund the master plan for the state ferries in hand. Additionally, I guess as I move towards interim, I'm working on some GMA reform, how we look at land use. I'm going to continue working on the state bank proposition. For those of you that were kind of following the legislative work around the Washington Strong proposal, which was, kind of for lack of a better description, it was a Green New Deal style proposal of putting a price on carbon and using it for infrastructure investments and climate resiliency. Part of that pushed the Climate Commitment Act to where it stood at its final passage as it left the legislature, but other parts I think are very easy to continue under the auspices of the state bank, where we know we need to make massive investments in climate resiliency across the state, and trying to figure out how to leverage some of those concepts into that proposal as we move it forward next year. So yeah, I like I said, I'm in between. I've been in the car for many hours, and I'm sitting here for a few minutes, and so I will probably miss the Q&A, but just want to make sure to say hi to everybody. This is my hometown team. So glad to be able to work with you all, and taking a deeper dive about either the work that we accomplished in the legislature or interim work moving forward of how we want to continue to collaborate into the next session and beyond. So thanks for having me out today.
Oh, thanks so much for stopping by. Really appreciate it. And thanks for all that
Absolutely.
you do. It's wonderful. All right. So we were very lucky to have Liz for a few minutes. So she heads home. And so we'll move on to Alex Rammel from the 40th.
Thanks, Barbara.
Okay, and I'm going to say all the committees that you're on as well. You're a busy man. Alex is on the Finance Committee, the Environmental and Energy Committee, the Transportation Committee, the Rules Committee, and the Deputy Majority Whip. And Amanda Ubik is also here, so we have two folks from that group. Thank you for coming, Alex. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Amanda, as well. Really appreciate that, both of you. So let us know what's going on.
Well, thank you. It is great to be with you virtually. I do miss coming down to the library to see folks in person, and looking forward to when we're all healthy and safe and can do that again in the near future. I will say it makes me a little bit nervous talking third after everybody's already sort of picked over the best legislation, but I think it's a testament to the year that we had. That there's a bunch of things still on my list to mention that the other folks haven't gotten to yet. So I would just highlight a few things that popped out for me, and then I really am looking forward to digging in on questions. We passed Senator Doss's plastic pollution bill, which sets up a market for recycled plastic material. And it really starts with the reduce and reuse ends of the reduce, reuse, recycle, and really makes Washington state a national leader on preventing plastics pollution. I would touch briefly on the Climate Commitment Act, but I think it's really really enormous when we're talking about the outcomes from this legislative session. The Cap and Invest program that was passed, it was a struggle to get the votes necessary to get it across the finish line, and it's been something folks have been working on for years. And what Washington State now has is nation-leading legislation to confront our climate crisis. And it's something we're going to have more work to do on, but it's something that I was really moved to be able to be part of working on and making sure that bill is as good as we could get it. We passed the Fair Start for Kids Act, which has been in the works for a long time, desperately needed as we think about recovering from the economic impacts of the pandemic. We know that we need to get people back to work, and to be able to get back to work, they need to be able to take care of their kids. And part of that means making sure that folks who take care of kids get paid a decent wage. It is one of the most important gender equity issues, and it's a critical racial equity issue. Most of the people doing that work and relying on that work are women, and often and predominantly women of color. So make major investments in early childhood education. Liz mentioned some of the investments we made in housing. But alongside that, I would really emphasize the tenant protections piece, making sure that, I mean, look, we know that one of the leading causes or exacerbating factors in creating homelessness is evictions. And we know that people of color in some parts of Washington State, Black tenants are 5 times more likely to be evicted than white tenants. And so the legislation we passed to make sure that there's a dispute resolution process before eviction, that low-income tenants have protection, have access to counsel, and then that there needs to be identified just cause. Doesn't mean that a difficult tenant can't be evicted. It just means that you need to demonstrate a justified reason for an eviction. And we think that will go a long way to addressing some of those challenges that we're facing. Would emphasize the work done on criminal justice reform. There's a lot done this year. There's a lot further to go, but I think the legislature really did step up and respond to the historic civil rights movement that we've seen the last year following the murder of George Floyd. Response that included things like a police tactics bill that prevents, that will ban things like chokeholds, neck restraints, no-knock warrants, and limit the use of tactics like tear gas, and the militarization of our peace officers. That's a bill that I think makes a big difference, and I think it also goes a long way to show the kind of working style that the Democrats have led with. The Fraternal Order of Police started off in firm opposition to that legislation, and the day before we passed it, following extensive consultation and back and forth, the Fraternal Order of the Police published an op-ed in support of that legislation. So I think those kinds of things is an important part of our response to that civil rights movement. But I would go a step further and say that the Democrats really tried to think about equity across the spectrum. Unfortunately, our racial injustices aren't just about interactions with police. It's not just about criminal justice system. It's about housing, it's education, it's healthcare. And so we started to really embody the need to work on justice in our society by thinking about it in every bill that we passed. And I often liken that to the way that we think about the budget, right? We wouldn't pass a bill without asking, what does that cost? And do we have the money? And so for every bill that came through the House this year, Democrats looked at it and said, what are the implications for this bill on justice? And it didn't matter if it was a housing bill, an education bill, or a bill about farming. We wanted to know the answer and wanted to know that folks had asked that question. So those are a few of the highlights. I hope that one of the things that shows through whenever you see us working together speaking together is the way that the representatives and Senator Lovelet here in the northwest corner really try to work together. We've spread ourselves out to make sure we have coverage in the various committees that so that we can make sure our community's values are reflected and interests are cared for in all of the fiscal committees, all of the money committees. And we connect along with Joe Timmons from the governor's team once a week, maybe every other week now, but trying to make sure that we're just in coordination and thinking about the things that that we can do to be as effective as possible as a voice for this corner of the state. And finally, I'll just say I'm really appreciative that that you've recognized right from the beginning, Barbara, the importance of our legislative assistants as team members. It would be impossible. I would be embarrassingly bad at this job if Amanda wasn't there to make sure that I knew what I was supposed to be doing and reminding me of who I'm supposed to talk to and the commitments that I've made. And so I really am grateful for her support and would love to turn it over, Amanda. I would say to introduce herself, but I think you probably all know her already. But to just perhaps, Amanda, if you'd like to share any reflections you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much. And you know, it's great to see so many people. I'll echo what Alex said. I do miss going down to the library. I'm close enough, I could walk, but you know, it's so much easier to just sit at the kitchen table and stare at a screen for a little bit longer. I will also just kind of echo what everybody else has said. It's been a long, weird session, but honestly, it's been so productive. From a staffing side and a meeting coordinating side, one of the things that we saw more this year is that staff members were able to get more involved in the legislative meetings. A lot of times when there were activism days or lobby days when people would come down, not everybody can afford to take a day or two off from work, because a lot of times if you're going to drive 3 hours down to Olympia, you might as well stay the night, have dinner, and then drive back the next day. So we were able to see a lot of people while they were at work kind of come together and join in with their supervisors and their managers and their, you know, nonprofit organizers that usually just come up to Olympia. So the engagement has just been absolutely fantastic, and it's just made my heart so happy. I'm headed into my second year with Alex. It's been absolutely fantastic. We've maintained our check-ins. I love that he's on the finance committee. I get to nerd out about tax stuff. Also extra super excited. The tax structure work group is going to be doing a ton of meetings over the summer. We're going to get a lot of feedback. We're so excited about the direction that we're going with progressive revenue in this state. It's just absolutely fantastic to help organize all of these things. I also love the fact that we're, like Senator Lovelet mentioned, we're saving time. We're also saving carbon, you know, by not getting on the roads and spewing out, you know, and contributing to 45% of that pollution that we have. I miss it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, y'all know there's something magical about walking through those halls in Olympia and, you know, seeing people that you work with, but, you know, dude, they're elected officials. It's really, really cool. But at the same time, you know, we're doing the right thing. We've stayed home, we've stayed healthy, and we've got a lot of good stuff done. So thank you all for being here. You know, kudos to everybody that's just busted their butt over this session, and we've all done it together. We have an absolutely great crew, as you can see.
All right, thank you so much, Amanda. Appreciate that. That's great. All right, the next person is Deborah Lekanov's ledge assistant, Kaylee Galloway. Kaylee, could you?
Yes, hi.
There you are.
Hi.
I'm going to mention the committees first that Deborah's on. She's another person that's super busy. She's vice chair of the House State Government and Tribal Relations Committee. She's on the Appropriations Committee, and she's on the Rural Development, Agricultural, and Natural Resources Committee. So she wasn't able to make it today, I guess. And so thank you for coming, Kaylee, and stepping up and letting us know what's going on.
Of course, and thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry Replicanov wasn't able to make it. She's actually spent the last couple days on Orcas for various legislative meetings. So I suspect she might still be on the ferry or maybe just getting off it and stuck in that lovely Anacortes ferry traffic. But anyways, not to repeat what all the good work that everyone's already mentioned, I kind of focus my remarks a little bit more on what Replicanov was up to this legislative session. So we introduced, I think it was 7 bills, and 4 of those have crossed the finish line over to the governor's desk. We're very excited about all of them, so I won't go in any particular order, but one was around expanding access to legal aid through the Office of Civil Legal Aid. As it was, folks without documentation weren't granted access to those legal resources. And so opening that up will provide those expanded opportunities for, maybe it's a landlord tenant, or maybe it's some domestic violence situation, and the list goes on, and folks need access to legal representation. Second was a bill we worked really closely on, was we call it the school mascots bill. In other words, schools who currently have native mascots or symbols or names are no longer able to use those mascots, symbols, or names in their schools unless they are within or next to a federally recognized tribe, in which they need to consult with that tribe. So we're seeing a huge shift in our school districts across the state who have names such as, Indians, Braves, Totems. There's a couple others, but we're seeing a huge shift in kind of honoring and respecting our Native communities and the history. Another bill we worked on was around increasing, oh my goodness, I'm out of shape here. Replacing the Marcus Whitman statue in Washington, D.C. So every state gets to commission 2 state statues in the halls of Congress. And so we are bringing Marcus Whitman's home, and we're replacing him with Billy Frank Jr. Again, as we honor tribal treaty rights and salmon recovery and the environment. So we're really excited to bring Billy Frank to Washington, D.C. And then the 4th bill was around reforming coroners. And in some small counties, there can often be conflicts of interest between coroners who are also prosecutors. And so this bill kind of works to alleviate some of those concerns, and also to increase accountability and accreditation for county coroners. The bills that didn't quite make it across the finish line, the one that we're still really working hard on is HB 1117. That's incorporating salmon recovery into the Growth Management Act through local comprehensive plans. So as you all may know, Skagit is included in the cohort of counties that need to update their comp plan in 2025. And so as we're starting to think more about GMA reform and how we grow and how we also protect our natural resources, and that can include working on salmon recovery, incorporating climate considerations. So we still have a lot of work over the interim to do work for 1117 for next year. And then the other big issue I think Replicanov will work on quite a bit this interim is around missing and murdered Indigenous women and people. So in consultation with the tribes and the AG's office and Goya, the Governor's Office of Indian Affairs, and Senator Dingra, Replicanov worked on incorporating a $500,000 budget proviso in the operating budget that would stand up the MMIWP task force. And so we're looking forward to seeing that. I think there'll be more work to do. And then another one of the budget items that we were really excited about was transportation budget funding for the design and engineer of the mega EV electric vehicle charging station in Mount Vernon. That they would be looking at about a 75 stall, making it the largest EV station, well, maybe in all of the state. So we're very excited to see where that goes. Other than that, I will yield the rest of the time back to the group and if folks have any questions.
Thank you so very much for updating us on all the wonderful work you're all doing. This has been really impressive, to say the least. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to open it up to questions, and you're welcome to make comments as well, and you can specify who you'd like to ask the question to. We've had some challenges with muting and unmuting. Brad will help us out if people are having trouble. What you need to do, there's two ways to unmute yourself. You can go to the bottom of your screen and you'll see a little microphone and it says mute. If it's muted, it's got a line through it. If it's unmuted, it's got a little green thing on it, and that will let you know. The other way is that you can press on your what is it called? Your return key, and just press it down, and that unmutes you as well. Brad just told me that. So that's kind of an interesting.
It's actually your space bar. If you hold your space bar down, then you'll be unmuted while you're speaking.
So live and learn. I had no idea. Okay. Also at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a reactions. It's on the right-hand side at the very bottom. And if you click on that, you'll see a big yellow hand. And if you use that, you can raise your hand and your name will come up in the chat box, and I'll know that you want to ask a question. So that should be helpful. If you have any real trouble, Brad can help you out. Hopefully things will go smoothly. And before we start the questions, I wanted to say this to let everyone know, we'll have another meeting on June 8th, which is the second Tuesday at 7 o'clock. And the topic has not been determined yet. So you will definitely be notified about what we're going to be presenting. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to people to ask some questions and go from there.
Don Ambrose has his hand up, Barb.
Okay, Don.
I can't recall whether it was Dave Paul or Alex that was talking about the state bank. I do remember hearing about that as an issue maybe a year and a half ago. And I've recently come across some reading where I'm seeing that there are particular groups of folks who have difficulty accessing or maintaining bank accounts, oftentimes very poor folks, migratory folks, and it sets all kinds of roadblocks up for them financially. Good example of that was the recent rebates that came from the government. A lot of those folks, if they could have had a direct deposit, for example, rather than trying to have the Treasury Department track them down with a real address. So I'm wondering if the state bank would be one of those aspects that could address that issue for poor and migratory folks to have access to bank accounts.
Okay.
I could jump in here unless Dave, you want to grab that. I think it was actually Senator Loveless who was working on the state bank. So you're stuck with Dave and me to try and clean up here. But I guess the direct answer to your question is that the intention of a state bank is a little bit different than what you're talking about. Recognizing that the need you're identified for unbanked folks is significant. But the idea behind a state bank, as I understand it, it could be constructed a few different ways. But basically, the idea would be that the state and or cities, counties, ports, et cetera, would deposit their money in a state managed institution that would then lend that money to other entities of the state as sort of a public works investment account, so that instead of going to Wall Street bonds, we would be able to essentially lend to ourselves at a better rate. It would be a way to both try and get a better return on the investment that the public institutions have, but also a way to reduce our interest payments when we offer bonds.
I understand that it's primarily focused on the business end of state municipal businesses and whatnot, but I'm wondering if somebody could at least look at including some kind of an outreach to the folks that are unbanked currently. That is a need, and if we're going to do a state bank, I'm thinking that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting and good idea, Don. So we saw some work this last year on credit unions, and then which I didn't realize until I got elected or until I served in the legislature, that the opposition from the for-profit banks to credit unions. So then there's also work on some of the really small banks that are minority owned, that serve marginalized communities. I think there's an interest in that in this last session, because the House leadership and we're trying to focus on COVID relief. We didn't get as many of those bills heard as you might have seen. I think you'll see some interest in that. And then it's great with Mike Palachotti serving as state treasurer. I know he's got an interest in this. Alex and I can bring that back to him. Thank you for that question.
Okay. I see. Oh, I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, just one other addition. There's a lending program through community development finance, CDFI's community development financial institutions, that is specifically targeted at smaller and rural, and Skagit County meets the definition in the statute, communities. And we were, that is targeted more at lending for small businesses and individuals in those communities, but is another part of the solution to the problem. And we were able to pass that this year.
Okay. I see Marie and Don Ibsen would like to ask a question.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can.
Oh, okay, this is actually for Alex regarding plastic. I love to shop at Costco. Costco is headquartered in Kirkland, but it infuriates me the amount of plastic, and especially the heavy plastic that they use for many of their products. Not only do I cut up my hand trying to get into the blessed thing, and it's an inordinate amount of plastic. I would think, it would be great to see if you could make any inroads with Costco, since it's a fairly local company. It's a good employer. I recognize that, but I do think that something could be done about their plastic consumption.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good point. There are so many little places in our daily lives where plastic is just sort of handed to us, and as consumers we don't really have a choice if we want to get that product, right? Which is why we need that kind of legislation. It's not as frequent, some folks might say that it's a consumer choice, but as consumers, your choice is item A in a plastic bag or item B in a plastic bag, right? It really is important that we create those kinds of standards. So part of the solution that we passed this year was to ban some of the worst kinds of plastic, especially things like packing peanuts and other sort of wasteful styrofoam, but then to also create a recycled content standard for many of the most common applications, so that when we're done using plastic, we can put it in the recycle bin and know that it's not just going to get stocked in a warehouse somewhere, but that it'll actually go back into a loop because there's a market, because the folks making plastic bottles, for example, will have to have a 30% recycled content standard. And then the last piece of that bill, and I think you'll enjoy this part, is for things like plastic cutlery that are oftentimes, if you get takeout, or just dropped into the bag. We've said, like you can't just give those out. You just have to ask. It's not that they can't give that to you, but so many times you get takeout and then you look in the bag and realize you're the owner of more plastic you didn't need. So it's a good start. But you're right. There's a lot more to do with those employers, and it really is a process of working with them to sort of figure out what they're doing, and then figure out how we can collaborate with them to do it better with less plastic.
Thank you. Valit, looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, again, I totally appreciate all the speakers. It's wonderful to have them all. There was a mention of the guest worker visas, which is, in my judgment, it's essential for our county, especially Skagit County, and I really appreciate the work on that. I was wondering if they would care to comment a little bit more on that and how it is going to work. And having said that, I'm hoping this initiative is going to work to help the farmers in our county. But on the other hand, it also infuriates me that these farmers, they go and vote for somebody like Ron Wiesen, who, in my judgment, doesn't care less about them. That's my feel. I could be totally wrong. But in my discussion with him, and very limited, it gives you the impression that he doesn't really care to go and help them, especially with their workers. So anyway, that's a side comment. But I would appreciate just a little bit more comments on how this visa issue is going to work. Thank you.
So, Dave, did you want to jump in, or you want me to take a run to this?
No, you can take the first cut.
Sure. So I think what you may be referring to was Senator Lovett's bill on farm worker housing. And so Washington State has been making investments through it in the form of a tax credit for farmers who build housing for their workers. And it's a major problem. It's a big part of our housing crisis here in the 40th in Skagit County, but in other parts of the state, especially. That's why the bill signing was in Yakima. And we have this this really terribly wonky thing called the JLARC, the Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee, that their job is to just look at all of the things that we're doing on a systematic basis every X number of years and say, how well is that working? Are you getting the outcomes you wanted? And when we write a bill, they make us tell what are the outcomes that you want to get so that you can evaluate 5 years, 10 years from now. Are you doing what you said you would do? And the conclusion was that the farm worker housing bill just wasn't doing what it had been intended to do. And so Liz's bill, Senator Lovett's bill, addresses the various issues that were raised in that audit, basically trying to make sure that when we're spending money through the Housing Trust Fund, that it uses the same definitions of farm workers. And then for the H-2A program, where the federal government allows people allows farms to bring in folks on a H-2A visa, they're required to provide housing there. And some of those farms were utilizing that tax incentive to do something that the federal government was requiring them to do in order to be able to qualify for this discounted labor. And so that meant there's less tax credit, less housing for everybody else in the system. So it was a fix to those problems to make sure that folks who are picking our food and planting our food and caring for our food have a good place to live. So that I think that was the bill that that you might be referring to.
So I think the explanation was very good. I'm always impressed with Alex's knowledge. Alex doesn't even sit on the committee that heard that bill, I don't think. So to have that depth of knowledge, I think is really helpful. Represents our community well.
Looking here, I don't see any other questions or comments. Is there anybody else who has any questions or comments?
John ML is a little bit shy, but I'm pretty sure he's got a question.
Okay.
Talking to me, Brad? I have a question. I heard the other day that California is either working on or passed legislation to regulate emissions from lawnmowers and leaf blowers. So that they're significantly more prone to emissions than even our cars are. And I haven't heard anything for Washington yet. Is that on our radar for the future, you think?
Senator Ranker introduced a bill a few years ago along those lines, and I think the Cascadia Weekly called it, or gave it the Grumpy Old Man of the Year bill award. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a two-stroke engine, so it just doesn't combust the fuel all the way, and the rest just turns into air pollution. That especially the people operating them. Yeah, you walk by and you can kind of smell the diesel or the gasoline, but it probably is a biggest air quality concern for the folks who have to operate them. Although I will say the folks who working on the landscape down the street from me just today, I saw using the electric one. So hopefully the market's moving there on its own. I haven't heard anything about a new piece of legislation headed that direction in Washington.
Did you hear if California passed that, or were they just still working on it?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. I use a 40-volt electric battery myself. So.
Okay. Okay, are there any other questions, comments that anyone would like to make? Again, you can raise your hand and it comes up. Oh yeah, here we go. Good. Art Heffine.
Art Huffine.
Thank you.
Yes. First off, I'd like to just say how proud I am to be represented by Dave Paul, and hearing our other representatives from the 40th. You all make me proud that you're representing my values, our values. So thank you very much for your service. This last legislative session was amazing. My question is a general one. And Dave, I'll present it to you because I know you are the kind of guy that gets along with everybody. We see bipartisanship non-existent in the federal government, at least what it's showing to us through the news. What was it like this session with 2 Republicans out of the 10th? What was it like working with them? But more generally, does Zoom preside a better opportunity for bipartisanship, or does it have any impact? And what was it like working with our Republican friends or not so friends this session?
So that's a great question, Art, and thank you for the kind words. So, it went pretty well from my standpoint. So Representative Gilday and Senator Muzal and I met almost every week. It was a little hard in the last couple of weeks. I'm looking at Maisie, because we, with the floor activity, you could be voting anytime. So our regular Friday meeting got bumped into because of either the Senate or the House votes. I think that's really valuable because, you know, it's easy to fall into the partisan traps. So you can see something or read something and think easy to fall into that trap. But then when you're talking to the folks on every Friday and trying to figure out how to divide your time so that you're representing the district well, and you know, we talked about capital projects and what our legislative priorities were in the district. You know, you're less likely to fall into that partisan kind of jerkish trap, which I think is easy to do because you're talking and looking at folks every week. And then I'll say our legislative assistants, Maisie and Eric and Nick, coordinate their work so that if somebody's emailing us with unemployment concerns, it's one of them is attacking that issue. They've got a system worked out so that our constituents are getting served better. You know, there's a possibility that we work better together, or our offices work better together than some of the Democratic offices in other parts of the state. You know, we disagree on policies and disagree on things, but I think also work to try to find that common ground. And then, you know, Representative Benke, who serves the Tri-Cities area, and I have become friends over the last 3 years. I really respect him. He's a good individual, and we have a lot of common ground. It was great. He was the ranking member on the Community and Economic Development, and we did the manufacturing bill together. I was his co-sponsor. It provides somebody to turn to, and he would call me, and the other way around when we are trying to find ways of at times minimizing opposition. You're trying to find the common ground. We have a lot in common. We're both community college instructors. You look for those commonalities, and then with folks you disagree with, sometimes you just got to tune out that rhetoric. I don't know if that answers your question, Art, but you lost that opportunity to see people face to face, which I think is important. So you've got to work in Zoom land to make sure you're getting that face to face time. And then with Matt Benke, I was seeing him three times a week because we're in 2 committees together.
I'd just jump in with two other notes. I totally agree, and I think the Washington State Legislature in general is by, you know, just because so many of us represent communities that you know, our districts aren't as gerrymandered, and so some of those pressures that cause, I think, a lot of the partisanship in the other Washington are less profound here. Not non-existent, but less potent. I believe the numbers that Senator Loveland has quoted at a couple of these forums are that we passed 330 some bills this year, and of those 311 got Republican votes. Not that they were not all of the Republicans, not all of the Democrats, but some level of bipartisanship. Certainly not all of the big ones, but and you know, probably not the ones that you will read the most about in the newspaper. But the day-to-day stuff really does include a fair amount of bipartisanship. I co-sponsored, when she took a sick day, pitch hit for Carolyn Eslick on a bill that was important and introduced by Skagit County government. Greg Gilday got in touch with me and said, hey, really want to work with you on the capital budget project to support the Swinomish Digwellich Addiction and Recovery Treatment Center. And I would say, though, there are some Republicans who are real good to meet with, to try and work with, and collaborative and friendly. And there are a couple that it's not worth the effort. And I learned that lesson again this year. I had 2 bills in front of the Senate Environment and Energy Committee. Doug Erickson is the ranking member, the ranking minority member there, and said, well, what the hell, give it a shot. He had sent me a note earlier last year saying, hey, let's find something we can work together on. So I called. Long story short, he laughed at me, which is, just really disheartening, because I was making an effort to try and find some common ground, and he just kind of sneered at it. So there are folks who it's worth trying with, and we have to just keep trying to figure out who those folks are. That's part of this job. There are some that I probably won't spend a lot more time trying on.
Okay, great, thank you. Is there anyone else who has a question or comment that they would like to make? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. So sort of wrapping it up then, I'll just, again, we will have a meeting on June 8th. It's the Tuesday evening, the second Tuesday. And we'll let folks know. You'll get a notice telling you what we're going to be doing. Also, if anyone wants to stay after the meeting and talk, you're more than welcome to. I'll be staying on, and if anyone else would like to. But I'd like to thank everybody, Dave Paul, Maisie Shaver, Alex Remmel, Amanda Ubik, Kaylee Galloway, Liz Lovelet, all of you for coming and taking the time and answering questions and telling us what you're doing. We're just an incredibly lucky area to have people like you. So thank you so very much for all your times and efforts. And, I just feel like I moved to the right place many years ago, and I'm not sorry at all. And people like you are one of the reasons. So thank you. And I'd also like to thank Brad again, Brad Kloor, for helping me out and being the host. I keep saying this, but it's true. I could not do this without him. He's just so helpful. And thank you all for participating in all that you do for Democrats and for the community, and for being part of this discussion. So like I said, I'll stick around, but and so if people want to chit chat and visit, that's great. If they want to head out, again, thank you all for coming. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much for having us. It's really appreciate your civic engagement.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It is a real pleasure and a privilege to represent folks who have this level of interest, and who really share our values. It's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good night, folks.
You too. Good night. And we'll see if anyone wants to visit.